All right. We are here, or almost here. All right, perfect. Perfect. I think we're all here. We're everywhere we need to be. It is noon on October 1st. So welcome to October. Hold on one second. Sorry, I have a cat who likes to scratch on my leather chair, which I don't appreciate. So here we are again. Welcome to Stop Bully Culture Live at noon on Wednesday. It's October 1st. Happy October. And let's talk about, today we're going to talk about safety in the workplace. And particularly your physical safety when it comes to being bullied in the workplace. A lot of times we talk about safety and physical safety is, you need a hard hat or you need safety glasses. And all of those things when you're working in particular environments are important. But when you're working in bully culture, your physical safety is almost always at risk. And I think it's probably the area or the type of abuse that people experience that is often dismissed very easily. We think it doesn't happen. We think it's not a big deal, and that your physical safety, it's not, nobody in your workplace is going to cross that line and become physical. Now, I 150% disagree with that, having been someone, as you know, if you've heard me talk before, that has experienced physical violence in the workplace. And also, I have talked to a lot of people who have been bullied, and most of those have had some form of physical violence happening to them in the workplace. And that can be physical intimidation. It can be blocking your supervisor or human resources or whoever it is blocks you and you can't get out, or you can't get into your office, using their physical body for intimidation. I've also talked to a lot of people who have had their stuff, for lack of a better term, touched, moved, altered. I myself have put things in the mailbox for the administrative assistant, had my chair taken out and alter what was on it, okay? Which is, again, a form of physical violence. When you take my property and you change it, that's property sabotage. Whether it's a form that you're filling in for your work, or if it's somebody coming in to touching your personal property in your office. I've also had people go into my office and move things around on my desk, because I got to the point where when I left my office, I had things lined up, set up in a particular way so that when something happened in the workplace and so I thought somebody was in my office, I could tell if it had changed overnight. And sometimes it would. So I know people had access to my office because the key was in the administrative assistant's office. And so there's all sorts of ways that your bully or the person who's perpetrating violence against you in the workplace can do that. So the first thing I think you need to do is think about your physical safety. And don't blow it off or brush it off and say, well, Bob would never cross that line. One thing that we do know about bullies is there's no line they won't cross, okay? So they are going to cross a line, and if they think they can get away with physical intimidation or physical violence, then they're going to cross it. So you have to think about your safety, because the other thing we know is that in bully cultures, emotions are high, right? Your bully has probably pushed you to the line and you're tense and you're anxious. And that causes you to react in a different way than if you were calm. Okay. And of course, we know that your bully wants you to be anxious and uptight, not responding in calm ways. They want you to be on edge. That's part of why they bully, is to see you walking around the workplace on eggshells. And the other thing we know about bully culture, it isn't between you and the bully, it's between you and everybody else, and oftentimes they're against you. So the environment in bully culture is tense, it's raised, so everybody is on anxious and tense. And when that happens, physical safety is more at risk. So you have to think about it. And here's how I think you should look at it. You should think about safety planning, okay? You should think about where are the places you're most vulnerable to be bullied and where your physical safety could be compromised, okay? Where are you most unsafe in your workplace? Okay, and this can be places where you are with other people. So it can be meetings. It can be, shared spaces, when you're in the hallway, when you're using the restroom, when you're going to get coffee, you're going to the break room. Okay, all of those can be considered. You might be more at risk in some of those places than you are in others. So the first thing you need to do is have a safety plan. Okay, and a lot of times when we think about safety planning, we don't think about work. As a former social worker, we use safety planning with women who were in violent situations where there was domestic violence. Right? We talked about safety planning. Where don't you go? How can you get out if you're backed into a corner, or those kinds of things? Who can you call? And I think that we have to look at workplace bullying with that same critical lens, that if you are being bullied at work, you are at risk for violence. So you have to think about those places where you're most at risk, okay? And then in those places, I think you need to develop ways to disengage and get out of there, both quickly and that is not noticeable. Okay, so for example, let's say hallways or shared spaces or break rooms are a place where you've identified that you're vulnerable when you go in there by yourself. Okay, because Bob comes in, Bob starts to intimidate, Bob often blocks you from getting out of the break room, and it's your physical safety can be a concern there. The first thing you can do, if it's when you're alone, don't go in the break room alone. Simple as that. Is that fair? No, but your safety is more important than fairness in this, in what we're talking about. Okay, so if there's spaces where if you do or go by yourself, then don't go to those places by yourself if you can avoid it. Okay, that might mean getting a coffee pot for your office. Okay, or bringing a thermos of coffee rather than going to the break room. And instead of, when you get your break, going to the break room, you take a 10-minute walk. Okay, so you're still taking your break, you're still doing what's expected of you, you're just not putting yourself at risk by going into the break room where Bob physically intimidates you. So think about those times, okay? And then you think about ways that you can get out of there. And so let's say so one of the ways that I often disengage in unsafe zones was, of course, I'm diabetic, and I would say, oh, I need to get some glucose tablets. Okay, nobody would have told me to sit down if I, needed to go get glucose tablets, because nobody wanted me to be seizing from low blood sugar on the office floor. So it was an easy and viable and unnoticeable way for me to disengage. You can think of ways to get out of situations like, oh, I have an appointment. Oh, I need this. Oh, I need to go talk to someone. Okay, ways that you can safely get out and disengage with the bully when you feel unsafe. Okay, so you can also think about your physical safety even in times where there's lots of other people around. So, for example, if meetings are chaotic and you feel unsafe, don't sit by your bully. Sit maybe at a corner where they can't see you directly, where they have to physically shift their body to be able to see you. Okay, so that it becomes noticeable when they're moving and shifting their body and they're, pointing their finger at you or whatever they do in meetings. The other thing is in meetings, sit near the door. Okay, so that way you can get out before Bob catches you or Bob tries to step in front of the door. So you sit close to the door no matter where you're at in your workplace so that you can get out quickly. Okay, so you have to think about those times where you're most vulnerable. The other thing I think is really important is having a list, a contact list of people you can call if you need them. Okay, so security. Let's say you're about ready to leave the office, you're getting up to your door, you're going to open it, and Bob steps in and stands there. And you have to pick your child up from childcare, and Bob is standing there. If you need to, you can call security. And you don't even have to tell Bob you're calling security on him. What you can say is, oh, I need to talk to security because I think maybe somebody broke into my car, or, it's after 5. I was going to have security walk me to my car. Okay, but you can also have security there if you feel unsafe. That's their job. So make sure that you have those numbers that are easily accessible to you. Do you have a friend that you could call that, could call you back and get you out of that meeting or that exchange in a safe manner, right? Do you have your your partner or your another colleague who could become available when you're in those situations? So, for example, when I was being bullied, I shared a wall with one of my colleagues. She was also being bullied. We were partners, so to speak. And if I felt unsafe, I could reach back and just quietly, I would talk up and I would just take my hand and knock on the wall. And she would know that then that was a time where she could come and help me. And she did the same, right? So sometimes instead of knocking, I would just take my chair and move it back so it would hit the wall and it seemed like knocking, and that would give her a sign if she was in her office to come and help me. So there are all kinds of ways when your bully is being physically or even emotionally intimidating for you to get out of there. So I recommend that you safety plan. So you have a list of contacts and people that you can call if you need to. So HR, in case something happens and you need to report them. Security, your local police officer. If the person that's bullying you is licensed, have the professional licensing board on your contact list. Do you have a mental health person who can you can call if you need to, your friends, and if you have any collaborative partners, so that those numbers are easily accessible so that when you need them, you have them. You don't have to scramble for them, okay? And with your cell phone, you could even make your own list and group in there that has all of your contacts in case something goes bad. The other thing I recommend is, again, like I said earlier, is finding those places and times where you feel your bully is more at risk to cross the line, both emotionally and physically, okay? That might be in shared space, that might be in meetings, and then figure out ways to increase your safety in those settings where you're more vulnerable to physical violence. Don't sit next to the bully. Don't go into meetings until you absolutely have to. If you're going to the meeting early is a time when Bob bullies you. Don't go into the break room alone if that's a place where Bob bullies you. So when you find those spots where you're uncomfortable, that are high anxiety, and you feel more at risk, what you can do then is strategize for safety. So all of those feelings, anxiety and all of that, are clues your body is telling you to pay attention to. Because when you have anxiety and you're becoming more tense at work because you might have a meeting with Bob, or there might be bullying, your body is telling you, AKA, it's preparing for bullying. And so you can't just let your body prepare, you also have to prepare your mind, right? So that's where safety planning comes in. If the break room is a vulnerable spot, how do you get out of there if Bob is there? And who can you partner up with to go into the break room to make it more safe for you? Those things take energy in the beginning, okay? But when you recognize those unsafe spots and you strategize at the same time, what happens is you become more powerful because you're dealing with Bob's bullying in a way that he's clueless, okay, and he doesn't know what's happening. And also, you're not putting yourself in unsafe positions. And so, yes, the reality is this, is if you're, if Bob is your bully and you have to meet with Bob one-on-one, that's always going to be an unsafe position, okay? But even in that, you might be able to meet in a shared spot. Maybe you go have coffee. There might be things, even in a seemingly impossible situation where you are having to meet with the bully one-on-one, there might be seemingly strategies that you could engage to help make sure you're safe. And one of them is having a list of contacts with you all the time of people that you can call immediately if things go south. I think that when you're being bullied, okay, if physical violence happens, we react. But when you think about the possibility that it could happen and you've developed a safety plan and a strategy before it happens, hoping it doesn't happen, then you shift your power from reaction to responding. And so then you will immediately know what you will do when that happens because you've thought about it ahead of time. So for example, you all know that when I was working in one of the academic settings I worked in, I had somebody physically come around the table at me, okay? And my colleague, my partner, the person came around the table at the two of us. What we ended up doing is we reacted. And even to this day, when I talk to her, because sometimes, we rehash situations, or I tell her what I'm doing and how I've used some of our experiences in my own work, I will say things like, well, we should have done this. And then she'll say, oh yeah, I really regret we didn't do X, Y, Z, right? And we reacted to a situation that we never dreamt would happen. And how we responded to it, or AKA reacted, was probably mostly okay, but clearly things that we could have done if we had thought about it ahead of time, okay? What I would have done is I would have called security on campus because campus had security. I would have gotten up from the meeting, went out and called security. I would have reported her to the licensing board because she was a licensed social worker, okay? And I know my colleague would have also done that. right? And I also, if security would not have done anything, I would have also called the police in retrospect. Those are things that I regret doing because I didn't ever think about needing to call the police on my coworker. So even if you don't think, and hopefully none of this will ever happen, is think about physical safety before it happens, because that makes you safer. That's why we safety plan, because then we have strategies and ways to deal with things if it goes south. So safety planning isn't just for people who are experiencing or have experienced domestic violence. Safety planning, workplace safety planning, needs to be done by people who are experiencing bullying, because it doesn't take much for Bob to go from 0 to 100. And when Bob gets to 100 and crosses the line, the person that suffers the most is you. And by pre-planning a safety plan, it protects you. And that's the most important. You have to protect yourself when the system isn't protecting you. So, okay, well, that is it for today. Next week, I'm not sure what we're going to talk about next week, but if you haven't, our first season of Exposing Workplace Bullying podcast, that has been completed. So I highly recommend that you go listen to it. And let me know the next season of our podcast will be in a couple weeks, and it's called The Bystander Effect. And we're going to talk about bystanders in workplace bullying. So that should also be very interesting. Again, if you haven't checked out my shop at stopbullyculture.com, I've added a couple of things, some reporting stuff, just a short resource on you can determine whether or not you're being bullied. And I have some exciting things, a mini course that we'll be releasing probably early next week that will be helping you to determine if you're being bullied. All right. Well, if there is nothing else, I will see you next week.